Have you ever heard of a place that, overnight, simply disappeared? I'm not talking about an abandoned village or a ghost town, but a place where everything, people, animals, objects vanished without a trace. It sounds like science fiction, but the most disturbing thing is that it actually happened. And before we continue, I'll ask, are you subscribed to this channel? If not, enjoy, because this is the kind of story that doesn't appear on your screen by chance. Leave a like and comment on what you would do if you were there. This isn't just another tale of unsolved mysteries, it's a case that blends criminal investigation, psychological phenomena, paranormal events, and believe it or not, a plot with more twists and turns than a good thriller. And it's precisely this mix that makes it so fascinating and so dangerous for those who decide to delve too deeply. The curious thing is that the more we try to explain the disappearance, the more questions arise. It's as if the city has been ripped from our reality and taken to a place we can't reach or understand. And this goes far beyond theories and rumors. There are documents, witnesses, and evidence that point to something that defies logic. Today, I'll tell this story as someone who not only investigated every clue, but also came face to face with the emptiness this city left behind. And I'll tell you right now, what you're about to hear here could forever change the way you see the world around you. I remember well the first time I heard about that place. It wasn't a town that appeared on tourist maps, nor on adventurers' itineraries. It was as if it existed only for those who truly needed to find it. Surrounded by a dense forest, the only access was a road so narrow and winding, it seemed designed to discourage the curious. The fog, constant as an old, ill-intentioned friend, gave everything an air of untold secret. The climate there had a mood all its own. One day, the sun barely peeked through the gnarled trees. The next, storms appeared out of nowhere, as if the city decided when it wanted to be seen. I remember once, on an old mission, when I had to follow an informant to an isolated village in the Chilean countryside. The pattern was the same. The more difficult the access, the more interesting the hidden story. Places like these hold narratives that never made it into the newspapers, and that's why they attract people like me, driven by curiosity, and I confess, butterflies in my stomach. The few people who ventured there always told different stories. Some said the road seemed longer than it actually was, as if time were dragging. Others swore that, along the way, they saw figures standing among the trees, just watching. It's curious how isolation can mess with the mind. It reminds me of urban investigations, where suspects, isolated for days, ended up confusing dream and reality. Here, however, there was no suspect. There was an entire scenario conspiring to be enigmatic. The origins of this city date back to the late 19th century, when a small group of settlers, fleeing bloody conflicts, decided to settle far from any known route. They chose that piece of land, not by chance, but because they believed it held a kind of silent blessing. According to ancient records, there was an almost mystical conviction that they were protected there, not only from enemies, but from any force that sought to tear away their peace. It's fascinating to see how the history of a place begins long before the walls were erected. These settlers weren't just survivors, they were visionaries in their own unique way. They planted, built, and organized a self-sufficient community where outside trade was almost non-existent. I remember investigating a village in the Andes that had the same characteristic: nothing came in, nothing went out. It's a kind of isolation that strengthens unity, but it also creates its own codes, difficult for outsiders to decipher. And for an investigator, these codes are precious clues. Yet, along with the quiet prosperity, there were also whispered stories. Elders spoke of nocturnal gatherings in the central square, where decisions were made by lamplight, away from prying eyes. Official records are scarce, as if the city itself had decided to erase the most uncomfortable parts of its own history. This always left me with the feeling that if the truth were written anywhere, it wouldn't be on paper, but in the memories of those who lived through it. And it was precisely at this point that my curiosity began to turn into necessity. Because if a community is born of a pact, whether explicit or merely felt, breaking that pact can have consequences that go far beyond what logic can explain. And who knows, perhaps the next step in my investigation would lead me to discover a legend that even predated the arrival of the settlers. Long before settlers drove stakes into the soil, the indigenous peoples considered it a borderland between two worlds, stories passed down from generation to generation, always with the same warning: The land that swallows souls. For them, that place wasn't simply dangerous, it was sacred, and therefore forbidden. When I first heard this legend, I felt the same chill I felt years ago, entering an abandoned house where residents swore they heard footsteps in the attic at night. Places like these seem to have a voice of their own, even in the silence. Indigenous accounts spoke of sudden disappearances, men who went out hunting and were never seen again, entire groups who camped on the riverbanks and in the morning vanished without a trace. But the detail that always struck me is that, according to the stories, these missing people didn't scream, didn't call for help. It was as if they simply accepted their fate, crossing over to the other side with a kind of almost serene resignation. It's disturbing to think about, but also intriguing to any investigative mind. When the settlers arrived, they ignored the warnings. Or perhaps they believed that, because they were men of reason, they were immune to legends. It's a common mistake, underestimating what you don't understand. However, for me, this choice said much more about the city than the historical documents, because every place is born of a decision, and when that decision goes against something that was already there, it's like planting seeds in soil that doesn't want to flourish. Something, sooner or later, will exact its price. And it was precisely this price that motivated me to delve deeper. If the legend spoke of borrowed time, then perhaps the entire existence of that city was merely an interval before something inevitable happened. And in the next step, I would discover how, against all odds, that place thrived as if nothing could touch it. Until one day, everything changed. What surprises me most about this story is that, despite the legends and the implicit risks, the city not only endured, it flourished. In the 1950s, commerce was thriving, and the population seemed to grow overnight. The most curious thing, there were no clear records of immigration. It was as if people simply appeared there, already integrated, like pieces that had always been part of the puzzle. It's the kind of detail that, for an investigator, raises more red flags than answers. The local economy was sustained by products that somehow never seemed to be in short supply. Even during the region's worst droughts, the central market displayed fresh fruit, well-preserved meats, and a constant flow of goods. I've been to ghost towns that once also experienced prosperity, and they all had one thing in common, an origin no one could explain. Sudden prosperity is often like a high tide, beautiful to behold, but always temporary. Another point that intrigued me was the absence of internal conflict. In any community, it's natural to have disputes, differences of opinion, and minor frictions. But according to the testimonies I gathered, in that city, there seemed to be an almost artificial harmony, as if everyone shared a single mind or purpose. This reminded me of a case I investigated in the interior of Goiás, where a group followed such rigid rules that they seemed more like part of a social experiment. And it was impossible not to notice the similarities. This aura of prosperity and perfect peace could be interpreted as a miracle or as a sign that something unseen was controlling every detail. And it was when I began hearing rumors of military movements in the region that I realized perhaps the secret behind this growth lay not just in the community's workforce, but in much broader and dangerous interests. When you investigate long enough, you learn to spot certain patterns, and the presence of military personnel in unlikely places always indicates something bigger is at play. In the case of this town, the rumors were persistent. Unmarked trucks appearing at night, metallic sounds coming from the forest, and even reports of lights circling the sky long before the famous disappearance event. It's as if behind the peaceful setting there were secret gears turning. During the Cold War, the country experienced a period of collective paranoia, and remote areas were perfect for discrete activities. Documents I was able to consult, albeit fragmented, suggested logistical movements consistent with communication tests, possibly even mind control experiments. It may seem exaggerated, but I've witnessed something similar in the interior of Minas Gerais, where agricultural facilities hid transmission antennas that no one could explain. And guess what? All surrounded by official silence. What was most disturbing was how the residents seemed unquestioning of these presences. There was no fear, no public curiosity, just acceptance. It's the kind of behavior that reminds me of gaslighting victims. They know something is wrong, but they've internalized the manipulation so much that they prefer to believe the comfortable version. To me, this raised the possibility that the military influence was not just physical, but also psychological. What if this relationship between the city and the military was deeper than previously thought? If settlers once fled conflict, perhaps they were now serving a silent conflict, waged not with visible weapons but with methods that leave invisible scars. And it was precisely by following this line of reasoning that I came across the strangest records of all, the sudden increase in psychological cases among the population. Just months before the town's demise, medical records began to reveal an unusual pattern. The number of chronic insomnia diagnoses skyrocketed. Residents who previously had a healthy routine began reporting sleepless nights accompanied by disturbing lucid dreams, always involving a bright light and a sense of calling. It's curious how the mind reacts to stimuli we can't identify. I've seen prisoners in windowless cells report similar visions after long periods in the dark. In addition to insomnia, there was a dramatic increase in cases of partial amnesia. People forgot recent events with frightening ease, but paradoxically, they remembered old details with unusual clarity. It's as if memory were being selectively reorganized. During an investigation in Patagonia, I witnessed something similar when fishermen claimed not to remember the last 2 days, despite perfectly describing a childhood lunch. These lapses are more than clinical curiosities. They are clues. Reports of mass hallucinations also drew attention. Small groups claimed to see motionless figures in the fields, watching from a distance. No one could describe the faces of these figures, only the uneasy feeling of being evaluated. And yet, none of these cases were treated as threats. This collective passivity always disturbs me, because when abnormality becomes routine, it ceases to be combated, and this opens the way for something much bigger to happen. It was the combination of these symptoms, the lack of sleep, the selective memories, and the shared visions that made me realize we were dealing with something beyond the bounds of conventional medicine. And when that fateful night finally arrived, all these signs came together in a spectacle, as strange as it was disturbing. In the early hours of the morning of the disappearance, something different was in the air, and it wasn't just the usual fog. Between 2 and 4 a.m., residents reported a sequence of intense lights cutting through the sky, accompanied by a low, continuous sound as if the air itself were vibrating. This noise was picked up by stations hundreds of kilometers away, but no authorities could explain its origin. I've been to regions where mining operations caused similar tremors, but here there were no mines, machinery, or explosions, just the sound and emptiness. Interestingly, no one described panic. There was rather a strange attraction to the light, an urge to go out into the street and observe as if it were natural. This reminded me of a case in the interior of Para, where fishermen would abandon their boats in the middle of the night to follow lights that appeared over the river, disappearing for hours. In investigations like this, I learned that curiosity is the most dangerous of traps. When something inexplicable calls to us, it's rarely to our benefit. Some indirect survivors, people who were outside the city that night, said the lights weren't steady but seemed to breathe, growing brighter and dimmer in a hypnotic rhythm. The sound, in turn, penetrated the body, making the heart beat slower. I can't confirm the veracity of this detail, but I can't ignore it. I've seen military technology and natural phenomena that affect the body in this way, but nothing that would justify a mass disappearance. And then, shortly after 4 a.m., the sound stopped, the lights went out, and the city was simply gone. There was no explosion, no fire, no sign of destruction, just the scene, intact, silent, and it was at that moment that my investigation stopped being just about missing people and became about absolute absence, the physical proof that something unimaginable had happened. When I first set foot in the city after the disappearance, it felt like I was entering a movie set, too perfect to be real. Houses were intact, doors unlocked, plates still on the tables, some with fresh food. It was as if the residents had left for a few minutes and were about to return. But no one did. This contrast between normality and abandonment always gives me a chill that not even years of investigation can dull. Most intriguing was the complete absence of signs of haste or violence. There were no fallen chairs, no broken glass, no footprints in the mud from the night before. Even the domestic animals were gone. As if they had obeyed a silent call, I've seen entire communities flee floods and fires, and there are always traces. Not here. It was as if someone had erased the human presence from the scene with a single gesture. In some parts of the city, I found layers of fine dust covering objects that were supposed to be clean. The strange thing is that this dust didn't come from outside. It seemed to have formed right there, as a result of something that altered the environment at a microscopic level. Scientists who accompanied me collected samples, but the report never reached me. Whenever documents disappear in the middle of an investigation, I know I've touched something disturbing. This strange perfection, this unexplained silence, led me to believe that the disappearance had not been an escape, but a transition, something that took every living being in a clean, organized, almost surgical way. And it was precisely this precision that made me suspect the event was connected to something larger, perhaps even to time itself. The next clue only reinforced this hypothesis. I soon realized that it wasn't just the absence of people that made the scene disturbing. It was the absolute absence of any trace of movement. No footprints in the damp earth, no tire tracks, nothing to indicate an exit or entrance. In abandoned places, we always find signs of movement, however minimal. Here it was as if the ground had been reset overnight. Such an obliteration of evidence is rare even in well-planned military operations. The experts I brought with me confirmed that the surface was unusually clean, almost polished in some areas. Interestingly, according to measurements, there were no signs of rain or strong winds capable of erasing tracks that night. I've seen attempts to cover up crime scenes using chemicals, but in this case, there was no detectable residue. It's as if the matter itself had been reorganized, erasing any physical trace of human presence. Another disturbing observation came from the sniffer dogs. As soon as they entered the city, they stopped, as if there were nothing to follow. I'm not talking about the absence of any recent human scent. I'm talking about a complete absence, as if the city had never been inhabited. This is something not even time can achieve so completely. It's an erasure that defies logic and science. It was this impossible cleanliness that made me realize we were dealing with a phenomenon, operating on a much deeper level than the physical. And this impression only intensified when we discovered that all the clocks and electronic devices in the city were frozen at the same exact time. As I entered the homes and public buildings, I noticed a disturbing pattern. All the clocks read 3:17 a.m. Whether they were simple alarm clocks, wristwatches, digital devices, or even more modern systems, everything had stopped at that exact minute. To an investigator, synchronicities like these are like silent screams. Something happened at that instant, something that affected every second of the city. It's unusual to see this kind of coincidence without a powerful electrical or magnetic event behind it. Even more curious was that even devices not connected to the power grid, such as wind-up or battery-operated clocks, were frozen. This rules out simple explanations like a power outage. It reminded me of a case in rural Russia, where all the devices in a village crashed simultaneously after an explosion in the sky. The difference is that there was visible destruction. Here, not so much. It was as if time had stopped for the town, but continued normally for the rest of the world. On computers that still had battery power, the screen froze on open programs, as if they had been abruptly interrupted. One woman, who happened to be visiting family out of town the night of the event, told me she had spoken to her sister on the phone minutes before 3:17. The call dropped, and she was never able to contact her again. This kind of personal account gives a more human dimension to the mystery. It's not just technology that's broken, it's lives that are interrupted. This mark in time wasn't just evidence, it was almost a signature. And if there was a signature, there was an author. The problem was that, at the time, I didn't know if that author was human, something beyond comprehension, or a mixture of both. But what happened next brought unlikely witnesses and a visual account impossible to ignore. Among the few accounts I managed to gather from outside the city, one in particular stood out. A veteran truck driver, accustomed to cruising those lonely roads, claimed to have seen the city go out before his eyes. According to him, the lights in the houses began to disappear, not all at once, but from the inside out, as if a liquid shadow were engulfing the place. Interestingly, he spoke of no panic or noise, only a silence so profound it pressed against the ears. Another account came from a group of hunters camped a few miles away. They reported seeing the sky change color for a few minutes, as if the night blue had been tinged with a metallic hue. When they tried to get closer, they noticed the road seemed to move backward. They walked, but the town's entrance gate never got any closer. I've heard this kind of report in paranormal cases, where space and time seem to behave elastically, but always with few witnesses. Here, there were several. There was also a couple who lived in a neighboring village and used to visit relatives in town every Sunday. That night, they awoke to a bright light coming from the direction of the road. Looking out the window, they reported seeing a tall figure standing on the shoulder, watching the town. When they looked away for a moment and then back, the figure was gone, and in the distance, the lights had completely disappeared. Small details like this are the kind of thing most people overlook, but an investigator immediately notes these external accounts formed a disturbing mosaic. The city not only vanished, but also seemed to interact with the surrounding space at the moment of its disappearance. And as the witnesses told their stories, I wondered what would happen when scientific explanations finally arrived, or if they ever arrived at all. When the first teams of experts arrived, the expectation was that a plausible explanation would emerge soon. The initial hypothesis was a toxic gas leak, capable of rapidly incapacitating the population, but there was no evidence of contamination, neither in the wells, nor in the soil, nor in the air. Animal tests showed no adverse effects. It was as if the environment was too clean. And for investigators, excessive cleaning usually means someone went through first to remove evidence. Then came the geological theory. A sudden subsidence of the ground had swallowed the city. But all you had to do was look around and see that there were no deformations in the ground, no craters, no cracks. It's impossible for an event of this magnitude not to leave its mark. I remember investigating a mine collapse in the interior, where the effects could be felt even kilometers away. Here, nothing. The ground remained firm, as if nothing had happened. Some scientists even proposed that there might have been some kind of unusual electrical storm, creating a magnetic field capable of interfering with brain function. But this explanation, while intriguing, failed to answer the central question: where did everyone go? Interfering with the mind doesn't explain the physical absence of hundreds of people and animals. It's like explaining a missing book by saying the wind turned its pages. The truth is that each theory crumbled as it attempted to encompass the body of facts, and it was precisely in this vacuum of answers that the strangest stories began to gain traction. Those that spoke of phenomena that science still can't measure, and to make matters worse, the next chapter of the investigation brought evidence that seemed to come straight from a paranormal case manual. From my first day in the city, I noticed my equipment wasn't behaving normally. Compasses rotated slowly, never pointing to true north, and portable radios hissed with static, even when tuned to known local frequencies. It was as if an invisible field was interfering with everything that depended on orientation or transmission. I'd experienced something similar while investigating a shipwreck off the coast of Marignan, where unusual magnetism caused navigation needles to go haywire, but never on such a widespread scale. The drones we took for aerial mapping failed almost immediately. Some simply shut down in midair, falling like rocks. Others returned with corrupted recordings, as if a band of distortion had crossed the images. When we managed to overlay the few usable sections, we realized that the faulty areas formed a nearly perfect circle in the city center, and this circle coincided with the main square. Too much of a coincidence to ignore. Furthermore, our cell phones, even with charged batteries, would drain within minutes. Flashlights would fluctuate in brightness, and digital cameras would change their settings automatically. This kind of interference isn't common unless there's high-powered equipment nearby, but there were no towers, antennas, or generators to account for such an effect. It's as if the atmosphere itself had been reprogrammed. These phenomena made me consider two equally disturbing possibilities. Either the city was under the influence of some technology we don't yet understand, or there was something else, something outside our realm of reality. And this doubt only grew when some investigators began mysteriously disappearing during their searches. The initial searches were already tense, but the investigation took a leap into the unexplained when some team members began disappearing. It wasn't all at once, nor in groups. They were isolated disappearances, always involving someone who strayed too close to the city center. The pattern was striking. Someone would wander off to collect data or explore an area, and minutes later, simply wouldn't respond by radio. Upon arriving at the scene, we'd find the equipment on the ground, intact, but no trace of the person. One case particularly struck me, that of an independent reporter who insisted on filming inside abandoned buildings. He told me the day before that he felt as if the ground pulsated beneath his feet when he remained silent. The next day, he entered the city's old hotel alone to film. The camera was found in the lobby, recording only static, and he was never seen again. This detail of the pulsing ground disturbed me more than I'd like to admit. Some survivors of these episodes reported blacking out for no apparent reason and waking up miles away, on roads or forest clearings, unharmed but with blurred memories. It's a pattern reminiscent of abduction cases, albeit without the typical physical markings. This led me to consider the hypothesis that the phenomenon wasn't just affecting the town on the night of the original event. It remained active, selective, and unpredictable. This continuing mystery suggested that the city hadn't simply disappeared. It was somehow interacting with anyone who dared enter its territory. And it was at this point that the line between criminal investigation and paranormal phenomena began to blur completely. The next clue came not from technical evidence, but from mystical accounts, and I confess, they left me more uneasy than any scientific data. It was at this point that I decided to listen to people who don't normally fall under the radar of traditional investigations: clairvoyants, mediums, and practitioners of spiritual rituals. Most of them claim to feel an energy tearing the line between our world and something we can't name. One medium, in particular, described the city as a body that has been absorbed by another dimension because the pact that held it together has been broken. And he wasn't saying this metaphorically, it was a blunt, convicted statement. These accounts coincided uncomfortably with the legend told by indigenous peoples about the land that swallows souls. According to some seers, the night of the disappearance was actually the completion of a term. Since its founding, the city had remained on loan to our reality, and when the debt matured, there was no possibility of negotiation. This narrative, fantastical as it may seem, had a strange internal logic that matched details unexplained by science. There were also phenomena reported by later visitors: voices whispering names in the wind, shadows moving without a light source, and the physical sensation of being watched even when alone. A documentary crew who accompanied me swore they had recorded children's laughter on a microphone, even while standing in the middle of an empty street. These recordings, to my frustration, mysteriously disappeared from their archives days later. I can't claim these statements are concrete proof, but I can't ignore the fact that each new report added a piece to the puzzle, a puzzle that was slowly taking shape as something deliberate, planned, and hidden by forces far beyond our control. This suspicion only grew when I came across documents that the government seemed to do everything it could to keep hidden from prying eyes. Among the files I managed to access, few contained anything truly substantial about the city. The rest were marked with confidential or restricted stamps. In some cases, entire pages had been ripped out or covered with black bars. But what caught my attention most was a dossier dated just a few days before the disappearance. The visible content was minimal, but there were references to monitoring anomalous activity and permanent isolation recommendation. None of this was in public reports. I tried to contact former security agency employees who theoretically could have participated in the investigations. Most denied any involvement. Some hung up on me. One of them, however, contacted me days later anonymously and told me that what happened there was neither an accident nor a natural phenomenon. It was compliance with a protocol that shouldn't have existed. That phrase echoed in my mind for weeks. In other investigations, I've seen documents mysteriously disappear, but here, the scale was different. Even meteorological records from the region were tampered with, as if someone wanted to erase any trace that might link the event to an unusual weather pattern. The town's disappearance seemed to have been followed by a meticulous erasure of its own history, as if there were an active effort to ensure that, over time, it would all become just a poorly told legend. This realization left me with a nagging question. If so much energy was being expended on covering up the case, what exactly was being hidden? The answer wouldn't come from official records, but rather from people who, against all odds, survived the phenomenon and came forward years later. Decades after the disappearance, some former residents began to appear in neighboring towns, as if they had simply woken up there. The strangest thing, is that none of them could explain how they had left. When asked about the night of the event, their answers ranged from embarrassed silence to fragmented accounts, as if important memories were locked behind a mental door that cannot be easily opened. This psychological barrier, to me, was as intriguing as any physical evidence. Many said they remembered nothing after falling asleep, but some mentioned flashes, a very bright light, the sensation of being pulled back, and absolute silence, as if all sound had been turned off. One man described feeling a pressure in his chest, similar to what patients report during sleep paralysis, but in this case, he was standing in the middle of the street, surrounded by equally motionless neighbors. These descriptions, though vague, had commonalities that could not be mere coincidence. Most disturbingly, despite gaps in recent memory, these people recalled past events with astonishing clarity. One woman told me, in great detail, about the town's first community fair, more than 30 years before her disappearance, but couldn't say where she'd been the day after. This selectivity made me wonder if we were witnessing memory manipulation, and if so, by whom or why. Each conversation with these survivors was like walking down a hallway full of closed doors, knowing that behind one of them lay the truth, but without the key to open it. And as I searched for that key, I discovered that the government had taken drastic measures to prevent curious onlookers, like me, from getting too close to what remained of the city. Not long before the area where the city once stood was officially declared a risk zone, warning signs appeared on the roads, and physical barriers were installed to keep out the curious. Police patrolled regularly, and anyone attempting to approach was stopped, and in some cases, escorted away. The government claimed the measure was to protect the population from environmental instability, but never explained what kind of instability could persist for so long. This ban, of course, only heightened curiosity. Mystery hunters, journalists, and adventurers tried countless times to circumvent the surveillance. Some succeeded, but quickly returned, claiming to experience intense nausea, dizziness, and even sudden fainting spells as they approached the old city center. One told me that, even with his eyes closed, he felt as if he were being watched by dozens of pairs of eyes. It's the kind of story you never forget. Interestingly, local tour companies began offering viewing tours to a safe spot where visitors could see the edge of the old road, but the experience was frustrating. The constant fog obscured almost all view, as if nature itself were collaborating to hide what remained. I've been there more than once, and I can tell you there's something deeply uncomfortable about being so close to a place that seems to reject visitors. This physical and sensory barrier turned the city's disappearance into an inaccessible myth, further fueling theories about what really happened. And even with so many obstacles, there were still those dedicated to preserving the memory of this place, not on the streets, but in the pages of books, film scripts, and legends told by the light of a campfire. Over the years, the story of the vanished city ceased to be merely a local mystery and became fuel for the collective imagination. Writers began to create novels inspired by the event, some remaining faithful to the original accounts, others exaggerating to the point of transforming the city into a setting for wars between dimensions. Filmmakers and documentarians also explored the subject, each offering their own version of the events, versions that, curiously, never completely coincided. The case has also permeated popular culture. Songs have been written about the place the night took us, plays have explored the plight of separated families, and even role-playing groups have created campaigns based on the disappearance. At mystery conventions, there's always at least one talk dedicated to it, and theories abound, from UFO explanations to spiritual interpretations. It's impressive how a single event can spawn an entire ecosystem of parallel narratives. On social media, the case has gained the status of a modern legend. Videos and podcasts retell the story with new layers, sometimes blending proven facts with unverified rumors. This is where the line between investigation and entertainment blurs. And while this complicates the task of separating truth from fiction, it also keeps the flame of public curiosity alive. After all, mysteries die when they stop being told. This cultural impact created a kind of indirect preservation. Even though the physical city is gone, it continues to exist in the minds of those who hear about it. But for me, there was still one final piece of the puzzle. Something found years later, which was perhaps the most enigmatic clue of all. In 1998, during an unauthorized expedition to what remained of the area, a group of explorers found a small metal object partially buried in the former central square. Inside was a surprisingly well-preserved diary. The first few pages contained daily records, purchases, appointments, simple reminders, but as they progressed, the entries became increasingly disjointed, as if the author were losing track of time. Phrases repeated themselves, words were written out of order, and strange symbols appeared between paragraphs. What caught my attention most was the last entry, dated the day before the disappearance. The voices are louder, they come for the light. No signature, just a long line, as if the hand had been pulled away mid-writing. For me, this sentence encapsulated everything. The psychological element, the paranormal component, and the sense of inevitability that permeated the town's history. It was a message, but we didn't know to whom. We examined the diary carefully. The paper showed no signs of deterioration consistent with the region's age and humidity. It looked almost new, as if it had been placed there shortly before being found. This raised the possibility that the object had been left there deliberately, perhaps to be found by those who continued investigating. A trap? A warning? We were never sure. This final clue didn't close the case, on the contrary. It deepened the mystery. Because if someone left the diary there years later, it means there's still an active connection between our world and the place where the city ended up. And if that connection remains, perhaps the phenomenon hasn't ended. It's just waiting for the right moment to happen again. After delving into every detail of this case, it's impossible to look at the world map the same way. Because if an entire city can disappear without a trace, who can guarantee it won't happen again, or even have already happened, without anyone noticing? The question remains, what truly separates our safe daily lives from the inexplicable things lurking around us? Perhaps the most important lesson is understanding that not every mystery exists to be solved, but rather to make us question, what would you do if you were in that city on the night of the event? Would you try to escape? Would you stay to find out what was happening? Or would you not even realize what was happening until it was too late? I want you to reflect on this, but not just as a spectator. Apply this curiosity and attention to your daily life. Pay attention to the signs the world gives you. Sometimes they're clearer than they seem. And when you least expect it, they can point to answers that change the course of your life. And now, I invite you, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and continue following our investigations, because this story may have come to an end. But mysteries, oh, they never stop knocking.